Dottie.
Hey. Hi everybody, my name is Dottie Vox, and I am a TTRPG designer, and I love sci-fi horror specifically, especially, and I've also been a special effects makeup artist on horror films. Wait. Oh, and my pronouns are any and all, I'm a gender.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicholas Francia. I am the stream producer and marketing manager over at Gehenna Gaming, where we focus on horror TTRPG. I'm also a content creator and a designer as well, and my pronouns are he, him.
I'm Katy Morgan. I use she, her pronouns. I am a professional GM. I specialize in feminine horror, and I'm also a content producer.
Hi everyone, my name is Burkhardt. My pronouns are he and him. I am a voice actor and audio producer. Right now I'm working on Ritual 6, which is a fantasy horror time looping audio drama that's set to come out sometime next year.
And I'm RK Wilde. I am a podcaster, streamer, content creator, writer, safety consultant, and whatever other hats I can put on. And I'm currently working on the podcast Fear in Living Color. So don't be a monster, y'all. Don't be a monster. When it comes to horror and TTRPGs, we talk a lot about safety and other concepts and how to run horror. A lot of folks are scared to run horror in general just because of the fact that movies are so intense sometimes. So let's start off by defining what is horror to us? Like, what counts as horror, or the horror genre?
I can talk about that. So, according to the University of Cambridge, horror is defined as stories or genres that we use to A, tell a story, and B, define the morals and ethical codes of society. This means that monsters, which are kind of the demonstrative bad behavior, tend to be like Santa Claus. If you are bad, then the person who is always watching you is going to report you out to the NSA, and you are going to get coal in your stocking. Or it can be like Halloween and Mike Myers, and if you, excuse my language, if you fucked out of summer camp, sex, which is a sin, is going to be bad, which needs to be punished, so you get the big scary bad guy or his mother to come murder you. It is a way to describe things that we want to make good or bad, and then tell you the consequences of your actions of acting on those things. Great.
Thank you so much for that very well-defined definition. Horror is scary. Scary, y'all. But what makes folks hesitant about running horror games or being in horror games in your experience?
I think there's just this stigmata to it, that it has to be something gross, it has to be something uncomfortable, because in this generation, this day and age, this is how we define horror, especially through other media. It's something that you're not going to like, and you kind of step back and question, well, why would I ever want to be in something like this? And that's kind of what we're doing in these past couple years. We're trying to redefine horror and what it actually means and how it can be super useful and super fun.
I think that a lot of people might be hesitant to run or play in horror games because of the bad experiences that they've had previously playing in something horror related. That's been my experience.
Oh yeah, one of the main reasons I stopped playing at tables for a while is because bad experiences of people doing terrible things to my characters under the guise of, oh, well, it's a horror RPG. You should be already okay with your character being mutilated or assaulted or whatever because it's horror, which is bullshit.
What was really worrisome for me getting into running horror RPGs is I didn't want to do that to someone. I didn't want to see how far I could push that boundary. I didn't want someone to feel uncomfortable or unsafe in any sort of game that I ran, because I am a weenie outside of RPGs, so I didn't want someone else to make me feel like they're a weenie too. So that was, I think that's probably something that a lot of people feel, especially if you are very concerned about safety in your games. You don't want to put someone through something that could trigger or traumatize them.
I do have a question for the audience and the crowd. Raise your hand if a GM has ever abused their power or their position in the game in order to make something fun or make something scary, but has really just ruined the game and made you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't be a monster, aka don't be a dick.
Uh-huh.
Listen, I wanted to name the panel that, but thought PAX might not approve it. The original title was Don't Be the Dick. So then, if we're worried about hurting people, if we're worried about, if the reason why people are so hesitant is because they're worried that it's gross or that they're going to get hurt, how do we make the games accessible? How do we make them accessible to the people who want to play it, or the GMs? What do we do?
Talk to each other. I know, real simple, it's a table talk game, you're supposed to be talking anyways, but lay out boundaries. Be like, hey, these are the things I don't want to see in my game. I don't want to see, eye horror, or I don't want to deal with, children getting hurt, or I don't want to deal with X, Y, Z. And communicate that with your party, and your GM and GMs communicate that with the rest of your party. Tell people, hey, this is what I'm hoping to get, or see during this campaign. Does this work for you? Are you okay if your character might die? And your characters and players can go, yeah, sure, or no, don't kill me, please. Simple as that, just talk to each other.
And I think don't be ashamed
Yeah.
to share your limits. There's nothing shameful in something freaking you out. There's genuinely nothing shameful in that. And if you are running the game, still don't be ashamed to share your limits. You as a GM are still a player, and you have every right to a limit at that table as everybody else does.
RK, do you want to talk about safety mechanics?
Hi, I'm a safety consultant for a site called SPG. It is one of the largest online GM finder, paid GM sites. And I do a lot of safety work, and part of that is talking about safety tools. They are very simple. You can find them online. Literally just search the TTRPG safety toolkit. But it is a list of about 12 different tools made by different folks in the TTRPG industry that are made to make games safer. I personally run my games with 6 different tools active at every single table. And that sounds like a lot. That sounds very overwhelming. The tools all flow into each other very well if you're using them properly. So one of the tools that I use specifically to communicate with my players about boundaries and stuff, sorry, my mask keeps slipping, is lines and veils. Lines being things, hey, we don't want this in the story at all. We don't want to see this. We don't want to even know that it exists. We don't want to joke about it. Veils being things that happen off screen. Most times when you're watching a piece of media, that media has lines and veils you just haven't identified yet. For example, a lot of media doesn't show actual sex. That is a veil. They will heavily imply that it happens by fading to black after the protagonist's kiss. They also sometimes won't show an actual death on screen. They will cut right as the final blow is about to happen, and then later on other characters will talk about that character's death. So lines and veils is one of the most popular ones to talk about boundaries and limits and things.
I'd also like to just share some of the specific ways that I implement the safety kit, as well as just kind of broader conversations about safety in the tabletop RPG space, especially in specific regards to horror. In addition to all the other hats that I wear, I'm also a professional GM, and so I mainly run one-shots. And when you run one-shots, you don't really have the time to do a really full, awesome session 0 where everybody hashes everything out and sets the expectations like you normally would for a campaign. So I tried to come up with a way to still get that information to me as the GM. And when you're running a one-shot, you as the GM, you're a lot more in charge of what's happening, just because it could be 4 random people who've never met each other, and you are holding their safety in your hands when you're running a one-shot at a convention or something like that. So if I'm running an online game, I have a Google form, and it lists out, please list your absolute no-nos, these are your hard lines, and it also has, tell me about your veils, what are you okay being in the game, but it needs to happen off screen, and I ask very specific questions Google Forms compiles it all into a nice little data sheet that I have. And then I know that when I go to run that game, I know what to not put into the game to make sure that my players are going to feel safe, because the safer you feel, the creepier you can get. One of the other things that I do for that is also, I make it very clear at the beginning of my game that if at any point in the game you get overwhelmed or you just aren't comfortable, that you will not ever offend me by saying, thank you so much, this isn't for me, I'm gonna go. Because I think that sometimes even if you think you're ready for something, maybe you've had a bad day and you're not just ready to go there. And I think that one of the most important things you can do for your players is give them permission to leave. Because if I'd known when I started playing RPGs, 15 or however many years ago, like, you can just get up and go, right? And I think that safe GMs, giving their players agency to stand up and leave, those players can take that agency with them to other GMs, and if they find themselves in an unsafe situation, it can help give them the confidence to leave. So I think it's really important to do that. And if you are running a game at a convention, take the first 5 to 10 minutes of your game and have paper printouts of, lines and veils, because also, like, that is some deep stuff to pour out in front of people you don't know, right? And so maybe people would feel a little hesitant to say, like, different stuff, or like, oh, this might seem silly to other people, but like, one of my hard lines is no hurting dogs in a game. Like, I'm waiting for Dragon Age to make a patch where they don't make the sad dog noises. Like, I'm that intense about it. And so, and I give my players examples as well. I say, hey man, one of my hard lines is literally don't be mean to dogs. Like, it can be whatever it is, and give use these tools to give your players agency to also take it with them when they leave.
I can also talk about what you can do with your streaming a tabletop game. I know sometimes there have been times when I am on a streamed Twitch game where something will come up in game that I'm a little too uncomfortable with, or that crosses a boundary that I may have not even known that I had. It may have been like a bad day, or it may have just been like a weird vibe. You can also do what I love, the X, N, and O cards. Sorry, math is hard to articulate. Those are just hand symbols you can throw up during your stream to be like, hey, X card, I don't want to see this. Because sometimes it's a little difficult to like be like, hey, I don't want to see this. So just putting up an X is really simple. You're like, not feeling this. If you're O, that means yes, I'm A-okay. I'm doing good. If anyone wants to check in on me, I'm cool. N is like kind of like a soft fade out. Like, I'm not like super feeling this. Can we take a moment to pause and maybe move to a different topic? Or can we take a moment to like help me suss out how I'm feeling and see what we can do to go forward from there? They're really simple, like hand signs, or even just something you can type in chat to your DM or send a message, or even your DM can check in on your players and be like, oh, question mark in chat, and people can reply back, yeah, oh, I'm fine, and maybe not, X, let's stop. You can constantly be checking in on your players, and they can do small or non-invasive things to give you feedback during the stream. That way, play doesn't just stop. It can just be a quick check-in.
I think something that's very important, and it's a secret that sort of there's this stigmata that safety rules, you hear it from a lot of the more traditional RPGers that we don't need safety tools. Why should I have safety tools? And I'm here to let you in on a little secret. Safety tools, going off of Dottie's point, they let you go harder. If you can learn the lines, if you can learn the veils of what people are okay with, you can come up with some really, really ghastly shit.
Yeah. Oh great, you don't like dog murder? Cool. That leaves a whole bunch of other murder we can do.
And I can tell you, and I've had these conversations, I've gone on rants on social media about it, that I can talk to these more traditional people. I'm going to say without going on a huge insult, but these other GMs, and I can tell you that I have 100% run a harder ship than they ever will, and that's because of safety tools.
Because if a player says, hey, I don't like spiders, that's totally fine, and it leaves a completely other realm of, what if I throw a giant snake monster? Or some more fun monsters? Like, I don't need to use spiders.
You can't do spider? Oh, how about like centipedes? More legs, different problem.
Yeah, you can truly customize what you're doing to your players without triggering them to the point that they are unable to play. And mentioning using safety tools on screens, oftentimes people are in a Zoom call together and they have a private Zoom chat open. And you can literally just type it in the middle of the scene and X, Enter, O in the middle of the scene. One of my favorite streams I've ever GM'd, a player pulled an end card during the scene they were not in. And the two people who were in the scene, which was me and a player, noticed it and started changing the scene.
It was a beautiful pivot, just seeing it like pop up in chat, and then immediately without any like bumps or hesitation, they were like, all right, we'll steer the conversation in a different direction. And it was seamless and fantastic.
And I still have a clip of it, and I've posted it on Twitter before and basically said, you cannot truly tell me which player typed the N in chat. Because none of them are like shouting or screaming because they know the safety tools work, and they just easily type in chat, and this is not a topic I want to go into, and we swerved away from it. And it was totally fine and totally simple.
There we go. And to again kind of piggyback on what you're saying, and especially talking about like kind of the more traditional like ideas that kind of surround horror, and this idea of like, oh, I should just be able to do whatever I want. Speaking as a recovering edgelord, because I was in the TTRPG scene in 2011. Okay, like I know what happened, and as a recovering edgelord, like yeah, I had that opinion. I was like, I should be able to do whatever I want, and if people don't like it, then they just don't have to play my games. And that was bad, and I ran bad games with that ideology. And since I have learned more about table safety and about making sure and like taking responsibility as a GM and as a player to create an environment that everyone wants to hang out and have a good time in, absolutely knowing where the boundaries are lets you walk right up to them. And you know, lets you know that you have a hard line, that you don't have to stress anymore about like, am I, you know, like crossing the line or all, and something that was said in the last panel that I heard was humans are more important than any game you could ever play. And I think that is the absolute core of horror.
And I would just like to say that if you think for a minute that you're ashamed or scared to play an exploit with a safety tool, there's a safety tool for that too. So don't worry about it. Safety tools can easily be integrated into any system that you're running, especially in horror.
And altered and changed and adapted. You don't have to follow the rule set. You don't have to use the X. If you have a different system that works for you, great, do that.
Some people use green, yellow, red lights.
Stoplight.
Yeah, stoplights. So it works.
Horror is the most. Horror has rules. It's one of the only genres in all media that has a strict set of rules to each of its subgenres. It is the most laud over piece of genre out of anything. And we always hear, oh, there's rules for horror. This person has to die first. This event needs to happen. This person needs to survive. So, in spirit, safety tools is horror. And that's metal as fuck.
And if you're confused about these sort of rules of horror, there is actually a movie which very clearly defines them, and that is Cabin in the Woods. The whole movie is about them falling into the tropes of horror and either dying or surviving and seeing what happens.
It's so well done too. Like you can tell they're tropes, but they don't feel forced. And they also do a whole lot of like homages to a whole bunch of previous horror movies and horror movie monsters, and it feels very like, I don't want to say like a love letter because I don't want to give that director too much credit, but you know, it feels very reminiscent of a horror movie.
Speaking of horror movies though, let's talk about something that I personally have a very strong interest in. Horror in TTRPGs versus horror in most media that you have. Because there are some big differences there. There are some massive, massive differences. And a lot of the issues that I see at tables is you have GMs who are so used to horror movies and horror shows that they don't really get how to run a horror game.
One of my differences would be, and this is just piggybacking off what Nick said, I don't think you have to have that many rules in horror RPG, or at least they're easily subverted. Because I think that horror as a genre has its rules that you don't break, but I think it mostly sticks to media, to television and film. I think that when you are doing something that's collaborative and narrative and free as TTRPG, that those rules are very easily bent and adapted for whatever table that you have, comfort levels, whatever genre you're running, mixes of genres. I don't think you have to, it's very easy to play fast and loose with the horror rules when you're making it your own.
I definitely think kind of the biggest pitfall we enter into when you GM horror is player agency. When you're watching a movie, or even when you're playing a game, you're on a set path defined by the developer, by the creator. You have boundaries on which you cannot cross because it has not been filmed, or it has not been created by any assets. And if I'm sitting there and a GM is telling me over and over, oh, this is what's happening, and I feel like I have no control, I'm not scared. I don't feel terrified. I couldn't do anything about it anyway, so why should I care? And 100 times over and over, the players' decisions are going to mess themselves up and get themselves into more horrifying situations than you ever could. And that is one of the greatest things to see as a GM. And you can just sit back and watch as this house of cards they built falls down on them.
Yeah, if you ask the audience to raise their hand if they've ever made a bad decision in a TTRPG, everyone's hand is going up immediately.
I can touch something a little bit more on the podcasting side of it, in that if you are running an actual play or doing a stream, it's kind of an audio-only medium, which feels dumb to say, but if you can't rely on the same tropes and ways of doing horror that you can in movies and TV shows and things that are a bit more visual.
You can't jump scare.
You can, but it's very difficult to do. Jump scares don't really manifest in the same way that you can because you don't have an image. Generally in podcasting, you use jump scares as their interactions with the environment around them, as in what do you interact with as you jump back from this thing of hearing. You can also use musical scores, which is also another way that you can enhance horror within your shows or within your table, is to add music. A lot of the things about sitting in a movie theater and watching something horrifying is, it's going to be the ambiance. You can't move from this dark place and are watching something scary on screen. And also, it is a sound designer's job to make you feel uneasy and unnerving. A lot of the big things that happen during horror movies are because you can hear it. And a lot of people don't think about that because it's a visual medium. Any music in the background or lack thereof, a silence is terrifying. And when you are narrating this to your players, you have to make conscious decisions to tell them, not tell them what is scary about the scene, but to point out the innocuous things in the scene that better inform the world, and also better inform how your monster interacts with the world around it.
Horror is really all about tension.
Mm-hmm.
Tension. And horror movies, they can do the jump scare really well because they have the image, like you said. You can't do that at the table unless you're planning on flipping the table in front of your players.
Which, if it's in the safety tools and they're okay with it, go ahead.
Or screaming in their ears in the middle of a call, which if you scream in my ears, we're probably not going to be friends.
I think the best jump scare I've seen is someone dropping an image into a chat of here's what you see, or here's the scene that you see, and your players have to go and click the link and wait for it to come up and get that tension of the scary photo. But that also still relies on visual mediums.
There's a really good jump scare you can do with 2 words. Roll initiative.
But yeah, horror is all about tension. So how do you personally build tension at your tables? One of the things that was mentioned previously was ambiance. making the room dark, placing candles out. Just don't burn your house down, please.
Or do, if that's...
Or do, if that's on the lines of veils, go ahead.
Yeah,
Ensure it first.
it's the immersion.
But yeah, you can build tension with ambiance, with music. If you're playing online, go to Roll20 and upload some creepy tunes. They have entire like soundscapes online that you can find for
If
free.
you're playing over Discord, they've got bots you can use to play music in your voice chat. You can do things, you just have to have the technology for it.
Like, put your players in a room and just play a ticking clock.
Oh yeah.
And I tell you, 9 times out of 10, they are gonna start to freak the hell out.
I had a DM once, don't do this without like prior consent, but I had a DM once take out a timer, like a Sam's timer, and just set it down on the table and didn't say anything, just set it down and let it run. And we started panicking because there's a timer ticking down, we need to do something. And it was a little anxiety inducing just because like, oh no, there's a deadline, but you know, it was still a very cool mechanism, and eventually a trap ended up being triggered that we needed to avoid, but it was very well done.
I have a whole acronym. I'm so excited to share my findings with you. The acronym is DREAD, and these are just some things that I do to add horror into any game, any system, any game that you're running. It doesn't even have to be a horror game. Maybe if you just want to throw in a little bit of that horror spice on there, you can. And it sounds obvious, but describe the horror. And when I say the horror, I'm not talking about this is the big scary monster that's in the room, right? I'm talking about what is it about the place that your characters have just walked into that's gonna set them into a state of unease. Like what would those characters find uneasy about what's going on? You walk into the room and you step inside and you go to flip the light switch and the lights don't work. You know, that kind of it can be these little baby things, right? Then the next one, of course, is R, and that is react to your players' doubts. If your players, like, just take everything your players give you, right? Like, just as simple, you know, when your players show you that they're uneasy about something or they're doubting if they, like, maybe can do it, like, just lean into that one.
They're gonna give you the best ammunition you have.
Absolutely, and that the E is for engage. If your players don't have a way to interact with the horror, then it's just like saying earlier, then like it's not scary, right? If your players don't have agency to make changes about what's going on in their environments, then it's more like, okay, well, I'm listening, you know, I'm watching someone tell me what I'm feeling and what I'm doing. The more agency you can give them, the more they will inhabit those characters. And the more people inhabit the characters, the more it gives room for that sort of unease and dread to build. And then A is for assimilate/steal the player's fear. So when your players, maybe you put them in a room and it's a crypt, and you know you're planning on making the big thing that there's like, you know, gonna be like skeletons or whatever, but the players are really hung up on that empty coffin. Okay, great, we're doing coffin now, because that's what's scary, right? Assimilate that, bring it in, like, just take, as you know, as he was saying, like, just take what they give you, right? And then the last one is deny, D for deny, and I don't mean gaslighting. But what I mean for that is more like reverse psychology, because when you say something like, oh, you go into the room and you go to flip the light switch and the lights aren't working, weird. And then your players, you know, will be like, oh no, and they like start, oh no, we're going into the dark room, and they'll start kind of like joking about like, ooh, we're going into the one with no lights, and then you just go, no, I'm sure it's fine.
Everything's fine. It's gonna be fine.
So that's my DREAD acronym.
One of the perfect examples of this actually happened in the first horror game I streamed, where the players are driving in a van into the woods, and immediately into me describing this night scene, it's beautiful, a deer jumps into the woods and they slam on the brakes, the vehicle stops, and the deer just looks at them and nods and then jumps away into the forest. And the way my players attached themselves to this deer, and then they found out at the end of the first episode, a deer showed up and approached one of the players who was outside by themselves and just sort of looked at him and nodded and turned and walked into the woods. And the player looked at everyone else and went, "I follow." And everyone was like, "Oh no!"
And then we immediately split the party.
I had also, oh crap, nope, just lost it. Sorry, that evaporated from my brain. Continue.
I think there's something interesting to say about player to GM trust, because the one thing you don't want to do, and you touched on it, and I think it's perfect, is you never want to, if the players are okay with gaslighting in the game, that's one thing, but you never want to physically, like, as the GM, gaslight your players. Like, one of the biggest pet peeves I have is when the party, the group of players, they know someone's bad, they know this person's bad news, and you turn around after the game and go, "Well, they're not technically bad." It's like, no, you know they're bad, you made them bad, you're the GM. You don't want to put yourself on the opposing side. You're not there to fight the players, especially even more especially in horror, because I feel like that's a genre that you can lose yourself in, that you're going to think, I want to hurt the players, or I want to, once you get that mentality, now you're just abusing them. And
Your DM is not your enemy. I know people like to think of like tabletop role-playing games as in there has to be a winner and a loser. Your DM is there to help you and to help the other players tell a story. There's no winning in this kind of tabletop game. You're there to collaborate and to have fun. And if you don't trust each other to do these things, no one's gonna have fun.
And I'm a big fan in any genre, but especially in horror, of meta. I love meta knowledge. I do not mind knowing secrets, and I know that's maybe an unpopular opinion, but there's nothing wrong with being like, if you make this choice, this is going to be your consequence. Like, there's nothing wrong with telling your player this is the road they're going down. You don't have to get all detailed into it, like you don't have to ruin the surprise, but you can make sure that they're knowledgeable to keep an environment that they're comfortable in.
I always like to say that content warnings are not spoilers. Content warnings just give players a heads up as like, hey, this is going to be vaguely something that happens. If I say, oh, a content warning for this game is going to be death. Who's dying? Who's dead? And no one knows, because it's going to happen, and you're going to prepare your players for it, and it doesn't spoil anything to say that it's going to happen.
Content warnings are also the bare minimum and required for horror. So, if that's a rule you need to change, you can blame it on me, but for real, like, content warnings are required on horror.
To the traditionalists who say that there are no content warnings in real life, peanut allergies, ratings for movies, if something is PG versus PG-13 versus rated R, those are content warnings. They're specific, they show up before trailers. When I say peanut allergies, it's something you are required to put in packaging. Hey, there are nuts in this, so someone doesn't accidentally eat it and go, oops, oh wait, nuts, and dies. Like, there are content warnings in real life, it's just we've been so acclimated to them that we don't realize they are content warnings.
And I've never had a horror movie ruined for me by knowing that there might be a graphic scene coming up. Never. It's never taken the surprise away from me. Maybe I'm the only person.
Oh no, there's blood in this horror movie.
Yeah.
It's never been, I've never had a jump scare ruined for me because I knew that someone was gonna die. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
I do also want to say about content warnings and like specific usage for people who GM professionally online. For me, content warnings that I put on my games are the non-negotiables. Those are the things that are so baked into the plot that, like, I don't have a great way to, I don't have a great way to, like, take it out or write it out, right? And that gives people the option to say, ooh, content warning, there's gonna be dog stuff in that, I don't want that. Oh, there might be themes of, like, stalking in that, I don't wanna play that game, right? So it also gives you the ability to, like, this is the story I want to tell, this is the game I want to run, I do want to address the themes, and that way you don't wind up with, players who aren't going to have a good time or anything like that, because you're giving them the knowledge ahead of time to choose not to play, right? That's, to me, one of the best things about content warnings.
Are content warnings though, they are tension. Because if you go into a perfectly normal game, you see a content warning for body horror, or you see a content warning for ghosts. Now as a player, all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, there's ghosts in this, or oh shit, everything I touch could just mutate me.
Talk me up, Daddy. Sorry.
And hey,
I'm the one wearing the Monster Fucker Deluxe t-shirt. Please, let me have my brand.
I have got consent checklists back that have said exactly that, or I'm like, hey, what do you want this rated? And they go, a Serbian film, and I go, okay.
I've had players who have hit them hard with something in a game, and they go, more please.
I think one of the requirements I've had for you DMing me is that I have to date a monster. I want to date that monster.
One of these days.
Yeah, I've definitely told Arcade you have a O card to just kill me.
Yeah.
Straight up told Arcade that many times.
I have one player, talking about like spoilering choices and everything, I have one player who I actively say every time they make a choice, hey, this is gonna hurt you real bad if you do this. This is a very bad idea.
They're being shady about me right now.
And she will go, hit me. Like fully investigating a warehouse by herself. I want to get in this truck that's being loaded that no one else can see inside of and no one knows where I am.
It didn't end well.
It didn't end well. Okay, but that all covered. How do you, everyone up here, for those of you who have done APs or streams, what do you do to run horror well? Because it's not just your players at the table, it's also an audience that you have who's listening and watching in on your story. What do you do to build the tension for them? Because you want to scare them at least as much as you're scaring your players.
There's a great concept in horror that I like to call when the silence breaks. Whenever you're in a horrifying scene, you have the music, and the music continues and it builds and it builds and it builds. And right before every jump scare, there's silence. And you're just kind of left there to take everything in. And when that silence breaks, when that pop happens, that's when the horror is there. So it's getting the viewers as well as the players into that moment and just letting them bake in that silence for just long enough that when you smash it open, it's gonna really send them to hell.
There's some ways you can mess with that too. Normally with jump scares and with horror swells, you see the thing or the thing is revealed generally on that beat of there's silence and then there's a sting, and on that beat, the monster appears or the horrifying thing appears. If you play with that pacing, if you have the sting, the silence, and then there's that beat and nothing appears, that'll throw off your players. If you have that sting, almost a silence, and then like even before that last sting can appear, it'll throw off your players. If you mess with the rhythms that people come to expect from horror, it can also be horrifying.
I'm a big fan of just describing what the character or what the audience is seeing before the player character is seen. And even though the player is there, I love a good face journey. And so letting the audience see your player go through the emotions of hearing all this description before their character even knows what's coming is such a good way to get the audience involved in that tension, because the audience feels like they know something first. They feel like they're, experiencing it through the eyes of, like they are watching a movie or a TV show. And it always helps to have a player that is just completely immersed, their face just contorting in fear. It just really gets the audience involved.
One thing about describing a scene that I love to do is describe a scene with horrifying descriptors, but completely normally, as if nothing's wrong.
You do that
And
so
you just
well.
watch your players go, you can't see my lips, but I'm mouthing the words, what the fuck? As you're just happy, cheery, describing this room that's covered with dead bodies. And they just have to sit there and wait for you to finish, and then they're like, what the hell's going on here?
They call that domestic horror, I feel. That's like a true genre.
I would also say make sure that your sound setup is good enough that you can speak quietly sometimes to build that tension, but so that everyone can still understand everything you're saying.
Sometimes the slow and steady is scarier than all at once.
So we've talked about all of this. What are some pitfalls you see at tables? Like, what are some things that you see GMs struggle with, or even sometimes players struggle with when it comes to horror?
Finding a good balance. I know in some games that I've played, the characters that these players have chosen didn't really kind of fit the world the DM had created. The DM had created a very obvious setup for a horror game, and these characters were named Frisbee McGee, and it felt very obvious they didn't connect with each other before this game started. Of oh, this is the expectations that we're setting forth. This is the tone we're going to take. Try and connect those two together, and if you can't do that, then it doesn't work.
Players aren't paying attention, and I don't want to say that's on the GM's fault, because sometimes you just can't help an attention span. Trust me, I have undiagnosed ADHD, I know. But if you just have a player that isn't committed, isn't really listening, is in their own world, doesn't want to explore, that sort of thing, it's definitely something I've seen at a lot of tables, and it doesn't really just bring down that player, it brings down the whole environment.
I honestly think we get hung up as a GM on trying to scare the players. It's words, it's text, it's something in your head. You're never going to scare the player, and the sooner as a GM you figure that out, the better it's going to be, because what you can do is you can creep out the player.
There's a difference between being scared and being traumatized.
And dread and terror. You don't need to get them to make a face. You can just get them to kind of dwell on that and think about that. And if they go home and that stays on their mind, what happens? But also, if it's consent, that's what they want to do, then that's a perfectly accurate way to bring horror into your game.
The one that I see most often is trying to wedge horror into a game system that doesn't facilitate it.
Touch the dragons.
Please, I know D&D is a fun game, but there are so many better systems for running horror. D&D's great. D&D's great for...
And can have horror elements.
And can have horror elements.
It's not a horror game.
Also, D&D is great, asterisk. But there are so many different games that you can play, and it's kind of the next question, but there are so many different games that you can play that are better suited for horror. Monster of the Week is a great game for horror. It is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, a D6 system. I say that I'm not at a fucking tabletop convention. Sorry. I'm used to audio drama, and that's a whole other basket. Monster of the Week is a great game. Urban Shadows, I've seen done horror very, very well. Quite love it. Other games are better for it.
Yep, want to discuss some other games that we like to run horror for? I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I focus a lot. When I started running horror, I wanted to run a very specific type of horror, and it was the horror that I dealt with in my real world, just elevated. So I love Bluebird's Bride. It's literally my favorite horror game. Not only does it have beautiful artwork, I can just hold my book close because it's gorgeous. It has beautiful expansions, and
There's a copy down in the marketplace.
it's wonderful. And then it deals with, and when I say feminine horror, it's not that male presenting people cannot play it. It is a game for everybody, but it deals with horror that specifically tortures people who present as femme. The expectations, male expectations on you, societal expectations. It can get very, very dark, which is, use safety tools of Bluebird's Bride, please. But it is probably my favorite horror game. Totally, I would play it, run it any moment of the day, and it's perfect for anyone to pick up. It's very easy to learn because it is powered by the Apocalypse as well.
So I've been playing Monster of the Week. That has been my bread and butter when it comes to horror, but I've read a lot of other horror games, including the Alien RPG, which is very good for horror, and also a recently released game called Locust, which is made by Cobblestone Games, something like that. It is basically a personalized horror game where it's personalized to your players' characters. Their own fears as characters become the horror within the game. And the better the stats you have, the worse you roll. It's very fun.
This game has been out for a little bit while. It's Pelgrane Press's Fear itself. It's based on the gumshoe system. And what I really like about it is that the fear is baked into the mechanics itself. You start out with skill points that you spend to enhance your rolls. And at first, as you're giving them rolls and they're spending a point here, a point there, eventually those points are gonna run out. And then you have to start making tough decisions. And you're managing your resources. And what are you going to do? Are you going to buy yourself time now and kind of nuke all the checks you can? Well, eventually that's going to lead you to the big drop. Like I said, that whole house of cards, because the players are just going to put themselves into a corner and they're going to make their own terror for themselves.
Hang on, reset my brain for a second. Okay, great. So I have a few options for you guys. In regards to horror in Dungeons and Dragons, because I think that it is, while not the most optimized system for horror, I do think that you can do things to make it, to bring horror into it. But one of my favorite series of adventures that's been written for that is from a company called the Arcane Library. And if you were an improv heavy GM, they write really excellent stuff because they write kind of like very outline sort of things. But they're big on safety tools and their modules. They have some really great horror modules for that.
I have to play one of their horror modules before. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, it's one of my main things that I run on like SPG and other places because they're so easy to just pull out and run. And so if you do like to run horror D&D, I highly recommend checking out the Arcane Library. Also, I'm definitely not going to sit up on a panel and not plug my own game. I wrote a one-page horror sci-fi RPG. It's called O2, and it is a timed game where your oxygen is running out. So if you would like to check that out, it is pay what you want on my Ko-fi.
I also have another horror game I want to recommend that I got to play personally on Fear and Living Color actually. It's called View Screen. And what it is this very simple game. It's GM-less technically. And everyone picks a role, and you're basically stuck in space. And one of you is the commander of that space station, and the rest of your players play the members of that space station who are all trapped. And you as the commander have to help everyone figure out solutions to try and escape. To try and escape, you will have 2 problems and about 5 or so solutions you can use. You can use your solutions for anybody else. You cannot use them for yourself. And the only person who knows if the solution works or not is the person who has it. And so you know whether that person's gonna die or not, but you can't tell them until later, when they try that solution. And it works so well on building horror and building tension, and it's very narrative and just lets the players just go and play. And also there's no dice involved, because I don't like math.
I wanted to mention one more real quick, because I got really excited about Secret's Bride. Another really good feminine horror game that I really enjoyed is made by a person named Wilde. It's called Black Mass. It's on itch.io. It is, you play 2 girls, Catherine and Lydia, and they are leaving Salem during the Salem witch trials, and you play different personas of their characters. There's tons of options you can play with different special roles, and it's used with a tarot card system. So it's something you're not using dice for. It's a beautiful game. It's all black and white line work. Definitely highly recommended because you tell a collaborative story about why they left Salem, why they were kicked out, and then you get to decide what their black mass is, what evil it could be nothing that they're accepting in their life. They could have been kicked out for nothing, or they could be full-blown witches, but you get to tell that story and you deal with, how society mistreats women. So it's a very good game.
I will also point out one, I didn't write it, but I voiced the audio book for it, the audio version for it. It's called Found Parts. It's by Whimsy Machine on itch.io. It is a look from a disabled person's point of view about slowly losing your ability to have and use your body. It is a solo RPG. You go through it, it's about 10 pages, I think. Very simple, but very fun, and a fun way to creep yourself out if you really enjoy doing that.
Solo RPGs are also an excellent way to learn to be a good horror DM.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want something that's just not necessarily mechanics, but great lore for horror, I am like hitting myself because I forgot to say it before, but I absolutely adore Cult Divinity Lost by Helmgast. It is commonly referred to as like the black metal RPG of RPGs, but it also has great safety tools and an entire section on how to manage that horror. And if you just want some really gnarly looking stuff and just fun, over the top, like religious focused horror, I think it's a great place to start and even adapt if you want to. You don't have to be married to the concept, but I highly suggest Cult.
So I have a really simple question for you all that might have complicated answers. Why do you love horror? Or why do you choose to run horror?
Because I'm a weenie. I want to be scared. It is a rush. I am a disabled person. I'm not riding roller coasters or doing anything like that. So I want to be scared. I want to feel my heart racing and feel creeped out and think for a week later, oh my God, why did the arcade give me this creepy monster that I have to think about now every moment of my life? And I think that's why I want to share that exhilaration with people. There's a mechanic in Bluebird's Bride where you tell someone to sort of shake themselves out of it, basically, and it's called Shaken, I believe. My brain is just gone right now. But if I can see one of my players being creeped out, that is such a badge of honor, because I've gotten to the core of, I've used my safety tools, I've used every tool that I've had, and I've gotten them creeped out, and they're immersed, and they love what's happening.
I use horror as a way to deconstruct and explore topics I find interesting. Every time I start a new game, I take a character and be like, what do I want to explore with this character? Or what do I want to write with this story, or what do I want to tell? Do I want to explore the fact that, like, my body is slowly deteriorating, or I know lots of folks will use TTRPGs to explore their, like, sexuality or gender, or like, what does it mean to be a trans masked person in a world that glorifies and over-sexualizes being a hot woman? How can I explore topics of being confined and restrained in my society and make it into something that I have control over?
All right, horror's therapeutic. You can get a lot of your issues out of it, and I know that RPGs, you shouldn't force your issues to be, you shouldn't force therapy on your fellow players, never do that.
But good God, does somebody need it?
But there's something interesting about going to see like a horror movie or playing a horror game and truly getting scared, and then you leave. And when the ending credits roll, whatever happens, there's almost a sense of relief. You've gotten through the story, you finished it.
That exhale at the end of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. That is like the best metaphor that I could ever hear for it. It's the exhale. And it's kind of the reason why a lot of like fake out scares tend to not work in movies specifically, because when you have the fake out and you breathe, you're like, oh, and they catch you on that breath, the breath is already out. You can't be hiccuped anymore by it.
They release the tension, you have to build it back up,
Yeah.
you can't just immediately get it.
Listen, if you're gonna be edged the entire time, it has to be a satisfying release.
You're gonna have a refractory period.
I was waiting for someone to make an edging joke, and I knew it would be you.
I get a little too horny for that.
The long version would take like a whole panel in itself, but the short version is that I am a creepy goth kid with a lot of trauma who likes to provide a safe space for other people to play in my creepy world.
Amen.
For me, it's that horror felt like a genre that I could connect to. I am a queer person of color, and for some reason, I fucking love horror so much.
We get painted as monsters all the time, we may as well...
Be them, or fuck
I
them.
was gonna say fuck them.
And it's very nice to take, because in media, you have so many tropes about people of color, and queer people, and it's nice to subvert those using horror.
A lot of us up here and in this room are in horror every damn day of our lives. It's nice to be able to control it. Like, we're scared of our existence sometimes.
I want to be able to defeat the big bad evil guy at the end of the day. I want to be the final girl. I want to have made it through the hell state that we have right now. And I'm going to do that by making my own damn horror.
And sometimes that's what you need to do. I know for me, like, when I started running horror, I was very worried about, would I be good at this? Can I do this? Because I'd gone through some really rough times when it came to GMing, and then I ran a campaign and it went super well, and everyone was very creeped out and having so much fun. And I've kind of like built a lot of the stuff that I do now on horror because it feels, weirdly enough, horror feels safe.
It's comfort.
It's definitely catharsis.
To kind of paraphrase a quote really quick and change it up, monsters in fiction don't exist to show that there are monsters in their world. They are there to show that monsters can be beaten.
We actually only have a few minutes left, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, hey, we're doing Q&A. There's a microphone back there. We'll go ahead and set up for that. If you have questions for us, go ahead and line up. If you don't, then we're just gonna sit here in silence for 5 minutes and get to look at each other very intensely.
That's horror itself.
Yeah, that's horror itself, the mortifying ordeal of being known. So yes, if you have questions, please line up, let us know. I do have some rules for questions though. We're gonna do this really quickly. 1, it better be a question, not a comment. If it's a comment, I don't want to hear it. 2, I don't need to know your life story, please just ask me your question. 3, if you want consulting on a personal project, podcast, or something, please pay us. And 4, if you are a bigot, you will learn how fast I can run, and I will learn how slow you can. Hi, hello, what's your question?
Hi, so one area of horror I'm particularly interested in is like cosmic horror, leaving more, leave a lot of the terrible stuff about Lovecraft, but keep a lot of the cool, indescribable madness kinds of things. How do you find a good way to incorporate madness, but without it falling into the same shitty ableist pitfalls that you get when you get into those kinds of spaces?
Don't do like a madness bar or like a madness like scale. Those are really ableist, and B, don't like accurately reflect how you as a character may be feeling. I just know that that's generally what I try to avoid when I do it.
When I lean into cosmic horror, I take that as a very good example to get on a base level with what your player characters are feeling. That's when they describe what they're feeling, what they're going through, and riff off of their descriptors. If they're feeling lost in a moment, make that real, make them actually lost somewhere. Like, you can just play off of what they're giving you. You don't have to fall into those ableist stereotypes, especially if your players are working and making a good collaboration with you.
I think they're really good at rephrasing because words like madness and sanity are very ableist. I think a really good word you could replace is despair, because that's something about cosmic horror. It's about people realizing that there are these great things out there and there is nothing they can do about that, and what happens when that despair fills them.
Same.
I agree with the previous points as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Good job, too.
Hi, So when I was getting into horror RPGs, I only really heard about Call of Cthulhu, and I invested kind of a lot of money into the Keeper's Guide. So I was surprised to hear you guys not really talk about it. It seems like the main horror thing. So I just wanted to get your opinion on the system.
Too many numbers.
I love it. I really like the Call of Cthulhu system. I've been in a few Call of Cthulhu like actual plays and stuff. I mean, depending on which, there's different ones and whatever to that. Do you mean like, do we feel it facilitates horror, or?
I just wanted your general opinion on it and how it facilitates.
Oh
horror.
yeah, I think it's a great horror game for people who love math.
I love Call of Cthulhu. I just think the reason I didn't recommend it is because if you type in horror and TTRPG, that's the first result that's going to come up. So I'd rather give you a deep cut. But yeah, I literally just bought the Horror on the Express reprint just like yesterday. So yeah, I love Call of Cthulhu. If that's your bag, go with it.
I like Call of Cthulhu. I personally have a lot of hang-ups because of the ableism, the way the terms are used. And that's when I would, if you like it, I'm not going to diss on Call of Cthulhu. It is a lot of great mechanics. But games like Cthulhu Dark, Fate of Cthulhu, they sort of subvert the way that the madness system is used by using other terms and other options and mechanics. And those are also great to really pick up. If that is your bag, if you love that cosmic horror feeling, I would definitely go deeper and look into more options with it, like other mechanical systems.
Yeah, I plan not to spend any more money this weekend, and then you guys have recommendations, so...
I also have another recommendation.
Oh.
Call of Cthulhu, which is an actual game where you play a cat, and you deal with cosmic horror, and it's ridiculous as it sounds.
Yeah. Really do want to give you a thank you for the recommendations, though. I'm going to be spending more money. Thank you.
All right.
Hi. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about emotionally centric horror, like horror without monsters, almost like if the movie The Babadook didn't have a monster in it and it was just about a sad mom.
I mean, it kind of was.
I mean, the horror of it was grief.
Yeah.
It was totally grief. I know when I read Bluebeard's Bride, 9 times out of 10, there's not a monster in any of the rooms that people go into. It is 100% their feelings, because there's a really interesting system in Bluebeard's Bride where you answer questions before the game. You get to really get into the characters and what they're feeling and their relationship with Bluebeard. And if you can, I remember one time one of the players was a classically trained musician. So she suddenly had musical notes appearing on her body out of nowhere, digging into her skin and causing her to bleed. It was a very body horrific type of thing. But we dealt with the emotions of why she was focusing so hard on what she was dealing with. And you just have to really listen to your players and find out what scares them.
Be fans of your players and their characters, and ask those questions that are going to help them develop the world more.
Just
Ask what your monster represents.
quick recommendation: Vampire the Masquerade, personal horror. Throw out all the politics bullshit. Look into what it is to be a monster. That's really great emotional horror and a good place to start.
I'm actually going to recommend you a video game. There is one video game that I played that I went into with no idea what was going on, and it felt like a horror game to me. It's called Gone Home.
Yeah.
It is an incredible game when you play it, and the way that the world is set up, it looks like a horror game.
And you keep waiting for the jump scare, or at least I did, where it's all right, I'm gonna go through this empty house, and I'm waiting for something to pop up, and then I would just read stuff from characters and feel it, and it was horrifying, but I loved it.
It's an incredible game, so that's an incredible way to do personal horror. And I think that's actually time for us. Let's go ahead and do outros really quick. Reverse order, so cool.
Hi, my name is Burkhardt. My pronouns are he and him. You can find everything that I do on my website at coleburkhardt.card.co. That is COLEBURKHARDT.card with 2 R's.co.
I am Katy Morgan. I was too lazy to make a card before this weekend, so I am mostly on Twitter at KatyFace. It's KatyFaise. And if you ever need to contact me for any games, you can make that, or just talk about more feminine horror with me, I am always there for it.
And you can, I don't use it much, but you can find me on Twitter at King Cole Minor.
You can find me on Twitter at NoblemanNick. I was Nick Francia. Over on Gehenna Gaming, we're actually running a lot of horror games here at PAX. We've been doing it yesterday and today. I'm actually about to go GM Vampire the Masquerade and tomorrow Alien, so go check me on that. Follow me on Twitter. Go to GehennaGaming.com, follow our Twitch, and yeah, don't be a monster.
Did Katy go away? Okay. Hi, at Dottie Box on Twitter is the best way to find me and find my Ko-fi. Also, we've been offered to use room 104 for like any additional questions that you might have for us. So a couple of us, I'll go there. Anybody else that wants to go, you can meet us up there.
And I'm RK Wilde. I use they, them pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at RussWildest. I also have business cards with my website on it, so if you want one, just come up and ask one. I have a lot of them. Take 5. But besides
Give them as
that,
Christmas gifts.
but besides that, like you said, we'll be waiting outside if you want to have any questions or anything or any discussions. Thank you all for coming, and don't be the dick.